Hi everyone, this week I am back in the flower patch and I am starting to plant up my tulips. I've been waiting a while to plant up my tulip bulbs this year because it has been really quite warm weather through October and very wet as well, and I've held off as long as I can for planting these tulip bulbs to wait for the weather to get a little bit cooler. And we have had some cooler days now, but still no proper frost, which is amazing for this time of year. Last year we'd had a really good frost at the end of September, and now we're getting on towards the later part of November and we've still not had a proper one. But it's time for these tulip bulbs to go in because I need to start on making Christmas wreaths and they need to get in before December for me. So the next couple of weeks I'm going to crack on and get the whole lot planted up. Every year I have the same problem with my tulips. I plant them in the autumn time, lots of hope for springtime. I label them all up, I put their plastic labels into the soil, labelled with which variety they are, and then come the springtime the labels have moved because of the wind or an animal being in the beds and disrupting them, or the marker pen has washed off and not been as waterproof as I thought. So I knew that something had to change because I like to know what varieties bloom in which weeks in the springtime for future weddings, and I like to know which ones have flowered well, which ones make a good cut flower, because not all tulips do, some are better than others. And so I do need a system where I know which one is which. So last year I decided enough was enough, I needed to come up with something that would work for me. So what I did is I got my garden canes and I started to put different coloured electrical insulation tape around the tops of them. So this is a green and white one I've done, and I've got a green and yellow one here, until I had a whole lot all labelled up with different coloured tape. So now what I do is when I plant my tulip bulbs into the beds, I put a particular variety in and then I put a cane in with the insulation tape around it beside them. And then I write down which variety it is and what cane it corresponds to. Then go and type that up on the computer inside, so I've got a record of it that'll last all winter and I'll know where it is. And the insulation tape is brilliant because it doesn't fade in the weather, it doesn't come off, it's really sticky, it stays on, and the canes don't budge in the weather either. So last spring I was able to finally see which varieties were blooming when, and it worked really well. So I'm going to do that again this year. So why do I wait until it's colder weather to plant my tulips? Well, the reason that I wait is twofold really. One is that I want warm, wet weather to be past. Tulips don't like to sit in very wet beds, and in October we had a really wet spell. It just rained constantly for days, and that was not a good time to plant out my tulips. I might have lost quite a lot to rotting if I'd planted them then. One of the other reasons that I don't plant tulips until later in November when it's cooler is to try and prevent the spread of tulip fire, which is a fungal disease that can develop in tulips, and you can get distorted leaves and the flowers don't grow well, and they can have brown spots on the leaves, and the whole tulip crop can be lost, which is a disaster. And if it happens to you, as well as losing all your tulip crop, you cannot plant tulips in the same beds again for at least 3 years afterwards until the fungal spores have completely disappeared. So it can be a complete catastrophic disaster to get tulip fire. And one of the things that they say helps prevent it is if tulips are planted in colder weather. And my tulips today, I have got my tulips here. I have got my canes that I have labelled up with the electrical insulation tape, and I've got a piece of paper and a pen so I can write down which cane corresponds to which tulip when I planted them in. And I've dug trenches in my beds which are a few inches deep, and they are about 3 times the depth of the tulip bulb, because that's about how deep you're wanting to plant them. And I put them all in quite close together. Tulips for me are a single flowering time crop, so that means that I'll plant them and I will lift the entire bulb when I come to cut them, so that I get that really extra long stem length. Tulips, when you are using them as a cut flower as a flower farmer, don't flower well enough in subsequent years to make it worthwhile keeping them in the ground. You want to be getting fresh bulbs every year so that you can get super quality flowers and that you can also get really good stem length. If you want to try keeping tulips in your beds, if you are just using them in the garden for a display, they may well come back in future years. They may just have fewer flowers and you might also have shorter stems, but that's absolutely fine if you're just wanting a nice display of them. So let's have a look at the beds. So here's my bed that I have dug out, and it has to be really good well draining soil that you have, so you might want to amend it if you think it is very heavy clay or it is not well draining. You might want to add some compost or some grit for the tulips to sit on, as they don't like to sit in wet, soggy conditions over the winter time. First one I'm going to plant today is Light Pink Prince, which is a single early flowering tulip. And again, when you're planting your bulbs, just check for the quality of them. Don't plant any that are looking like they're mouldy or mushy. So I plant the tulip bulbs fairly close together because they are a single flowering crop where the whole bulb will be pulled up after they've flowered, and then a replacement crop such as annuals will go in afterwards. If I was wanting them to flower again for me, I would space them out further apart in my flower beds to encourage them to come back year after year. Just covering these tulips over with some nice compost. The soil's all been amended here with compost out of the compost heap. I want to make sure that they are buried well, that they've got a good layer of compost on top of them. You're looking for a good couple of inches on top of these tulips. So I've covered the tulips back up now with a good few inches of nice soil. It's been amended by compost from the compost heap to give a nice nutritious base for these to grow over the winter time. They're all labelled up with their canes here, so I can see which tulips are which when they flower next year. That's a good job done this morning, getting some of those tulips in. I'm going to plant tulips in different beds in different flower patches, so that when spring comes they're going to flower at slightly different times, which works quite well for me. I don't want them all to come up at one time and be over. So by being in different flower patches at different times, they have different amounts of shade, the sun comes around to them at different times of the day, and that will help to spread out the blooming time for me. I'm also going to put some of the tulips in pots so I can control them a bit more with the spring weather. I don't know whether I'm going to get snow, wind, rain in April, so I want to be able to plant some in pots so that I can put them into the greenhouse to protect the flowers if I need to, or I can put them in the greenhouse to bring them on quicker if it's a really cold spring.